Some killers don't appear out of nowhere. They build. From early assaults and threats to more serious attacks, until one day, their violence crosses a line they can never step back from. Tonight, we're looking at 5 cases where the warning signs were there: criminal histories, escalating aggression, and moments where someone might have stopped them, but didn't. These are men who went from repeat offenders to murderers, and in some cases, to death row. These are 5 violent offenders who escalated until it was too late.
Case 1, Liam James Reid, New Zealand. Our first case takes us to Christchurch, New Zealand. On a November evening in 2007, 27-year-old Emma Agnew left work to meet a friend. She never arrived. Emma was deaf, but she lived independently. She was reliable, involved in her community, and surrounded by friends. When she didn't show up, people noticed immediately. Calls went unanswered. Texts stayed unread. Within days, police found her car abandoned. There was no crash, no sign she'd simply walked away. What started as a missing persons search quickly turned into something darker. A short time later, Emma's body was discovered in a park. She had been brutally sexually assaulted and strangled. Detectives knew right away, this wasn't random, this was targeted, deliberate violence. What they didn't yet know was that the man responsible had been escalating for years. His name was Liam James Reid. Reid's background was a long pattern of instability and abuse. As a child, he bounced between homes, foster placements, and youth facilities. Instead of correcting his behavior, those environments reinforced it. By his teens and 20s, he was already assaulting others, making violent threats, and facing weapons charges. Psychologists would later describe him as a high-risk, persistent violent offender, someone whose aggression intensified every time he was released back into the community. In 2007, people who knew him noticed a shift. He became more volatile, more obsessed with violent fantasies. He pushed away what little support he had left. His life grew more transient, more isolated, and more dangerous. Police had crossed paths with him many times, but never with enough evidence to keep him behind bars for long. That would soon change. Just 9 days after Emma disappeared, another woman, a university student walking alone in Dunedin, was attacked. She was ambushed, subjected to extreme violence, and stabbed multiple times. Her attacker left her for dead. But this time, the victim survived. From her hospital bed, she gave police a description. Witnesses came forward. A name emerged: Liam James Reid. As investigators compared the Dunedin attack to Emma's murder, the similarities were disturbing. Sexual violence, brutality, a victim walking alone, and a single male attacker who seemed to feel no hesitation at all. They dug into Reid's movements and phone records. They matched DNA from the surviving victim. Shoe prints tied him to the Christchurch park where Emma was found. Witness sightings placed him near both crime scenes. When they finally arrested him, he was carrying items linking him directly to the attacks. What had started as a missing persons search quickly turned into the capture of a serial predator. In interviews, Reid showed no remorse. He denied involvement, changed his story, lashed out at officers, and refused to accept responsibility. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture: a man driven by violent sexual impulses, a long history of escalating aggression, 2 attacks in less than 2 weeks, one deadly, one nearly so. In 2008, he was convicted of the rape and murder of Emma Agnew, the attempted murder, sexual violation, and robbery of the second victim. The judge imposed one of the harshest sentences in New Zealand history: life imprisonment with a minimum of 26 years before parole, plus preventative detention, allowing him to be held indefinitely if he's still considered dangerous. Even in prison, Reid continued to assault others, confirming what psychologists had warned. His violence didn't end when he was locked up. It was simply contained. To this day, he remains behind bars. For many in New Zealand, his case is a grim example of what can happen when a violent offender escalates in plain sight, and no one has enough proof to stop him until it's already too late.
Case 2. William Arnold Armendariz III, California, USA. Our second case begins in a cemetery. In August 2020, in Banning, California, visitors at a local cemetery suddenly heard rapid gunfire. When the shots stopped, 3 people lay dead among the headstones: Felicia McCafferty, Teresa Sanchez, and James Lara Jr. At first, it looked like a single, shocking mass shooting, but investigators would soon realize this wasn't an isolated outburst. It was the endpoint of a 5-year killing spree tied to one man, William Arnold Armendariz III. Armendariz grew up in Banning, a small city with a deep gang presence. For many kids, gang culture wasn't a distant idea. It was part of daily life. William was pulled into it young. By his teens, he was already running with a street gang, committing auto thefts, carrying weapons, and building a reputation for loyalty and control. Over time, his role shifted. He wasn't just another recruit. He became a reliable enforcer, someone trusted to carry out the gang's deadliest work. Between 2015 and 2020, multiple killings shook the area. To the public, they looked like separate gang incidents, but behind the scenes, detectives gradually traced several of them back to the same source, Armendariz. These weren't spontaneous shootings. They showed planning, target selection, and retaliation for perceived disrespect or rivalry. Around 2018, people close to Williams saw a change. He became more aggressive and paranoid, embraced gang ideology as his identity, collected tattoos with death symbols and loyalty oaths, and started talking like a man who believed violence was his purpose. Over time, Armendariz admitted involvement in 5 murders, 1 attempted murder, all tied to gang missions. But the crime that finally forced everything into the open was the triple homicide at Banning Cemetery. On that August day in 2020, 3 people went to visit graves and never went home. The attack was fast, deliberate, and focused. There was no warning, no robbery, no random spray of bullets. The shooter came there to kill and then disappeared. Detectives immediately suspected this was more than a spur-of-the-moment attack. Their intelligence on local gangs and ongoing investigations pointed to one main suspect, William Armendariz. Ballistics evidence tied weapons to earlier shootings. Witnesses placed him at or near key scenes. Gang cooperators described him as a central figure in multiple hits. Once his name went public, William ran. He fled California, moving across state lines. But law enforcement followed. They eventually caught him in Illinois, still armed and still uncooperative. The manhunt was over, but the legal battle was just beginning. Over the next months and years, prosecutors built a sweeping case, matching shell casings and bullets across different homicides, laying out gang communications and coded messages, and presenting testimony from other gang members and co-defendants. His brother, Christopher Armendariz, was also charged and later sentenced to 11 years for manslaughter in a related killing. Several associates were charged in connected cases. For William, the evidence was overwhelming. Given the number of victims, the gang motivation, and the planning involved, the state of California made a decision. They would seek the death penalty. In 2024, after a long trial, a jury weighed everything: 5 murders, 1 attempted murder, years of gang-driven violence, and a triple homicide carried out in a cemetery in broad daylight. They agreed with the prosecution. They returned a death sentence for William Arnold Armendariz III. He also faces additional federal time, over a decade, but the death verdict overshadows every other penalty. Today, he sits on death row, considered one of the most violent and prolific gang-motivated offenders in recent California history. For the families of Felicia McCafferty, Teresa Sanchez, and James Lara Jr. and the other victims, the legal outcome can't undo what was done. But it does one thing. It ensures William Armendariz will never again walk free.
Case 3, Avante Armstead, Oregon, USA. Our third case looks like an accident until you watch it more closely. In 2015, at Rocky Butte Park in Portland, Oregon, children were playing near a cliff edge when they spotted something horrifying. A body far below, on the rocks. Rescuers rushed in, but the man was already dead. At first, it looked like a fall. Rocky Butte has steep drop-offs. Accidents happen. But detectives started asking questions. Who was this man? Who was he with? And why was his car missing? The answers pointed to a chilling truth. He hadn't slipped. He'd been pushed by someone he knew. 19-year-old Avante Armstead. By the time he turned 19, Armstead was already well known to police in Portland. His record included theft, trespassing, sex abuse. He had no stable home. He bounced from friends' couches, temporary housing, the streets. People described him as unpredictable, friendly one moment, aggressive the next, quick to anger, impulsive. He also knew the victim, 22-year-old Irvin Batalla. Batalla was described as relaxed, friendly, and trusting. He and Armstead moved in the same social circles. They weren't strangers. They were acquaintances. Close enough that on the day of the murder, Batalla agreed to pick Avante up and drive him to Rocky Butte. Just two young men planning to hang out, smoke, and talk. At least, that's what Batalla thought. In the weeks leading up to that day, witnesses noticed Armstead growing more intense. He talked about needing money, needing a car, needing respect. He seemed more paranoid, more tense, more focused on what he believed other people owed him. On the day of the killing, he was described as off, agitated, pacing, speaking under his breath. Batalla drove them up to Rocky Butte. They parked. They walked toward the cliffside. At some point near the edge, according to a key witness, Armstead made a decision. He shoved Batalla hard, sending him over the rocks. Batalla fell to his death. Armstead looked down at the body below, then calmly walked back to the car. He didn't call for help. He didn't shout for anyone. He got into Batalla's vehicle and drove away. To him, this wasn't just murder. It was also theft. Children later spotted the body and raised the alarm. Police investigated the scene, and the initial assumption, a tragic fall, began to crumble. Where was his car? Who had last seen him alive? Detectives traced his final hours and quickly landed on one name again and again: Avante Armstead. Soon after, Armstead was arrested on unrelated charges and held in custody. While he was there, investigators quietly built their case. They collected eyewitness testimony describing the shove, forensic evidence showing injuries consistent with being pushed, not slipping, statements that Armstead had admitted taking the car. By 2017, a grand jury indicted him for murder. He pled not guilty, but as the evidence stacked up, the risk of going to trial became clear. In 2019, Armstead changed his plea. He admitted guilt to first-degree manslaughter, third-degree robbery. The original murder charge was dismissed as part of the deal. He was sentenced to 216 months in prison, 18 years for pushing a friend off a cliff and stealing his car. For Irvin Batalla's family, that number will never feel equal to the loss. He died at 22, trusting someone who led him to a deadly edge and simply shoved him over. Rocky Butte remains a popular viewpoint in Portland, but for those who know this case, it's also a reminder. Some deaths that look like accidents are anything but.
Case 4, Joshua Cottrell, Kentucky, USA. Our fourth case spans more than 20 years. It begins with a suitcase floating in a Kentucky lake and ends inside a home where a mother and her 13-year-old daughter are found stabbed to death. The man at the center of both crimes is Joshua Cottrell. In 2003, boaters on a Kentucky lake spotted a suitcase drifting on the water. When authorities pulled it aboard and opened it, they found the body of 36-year-old Gwyn Ritchie Phillips stuffed inside. The man responsible was just 21. That man was Cottrell. The killing itself was surrounded by claims and controversy. Cottrell said Phillips made unwanted sexual advances. He claimed he lashed out in self-defense, invoking what's often called a gay panic defense, an argument that has since been widely condemned as prejudiced and unreliable. But whatever happened in the heat of the moment, his actions afterward were deliberate. He concealed the body, packed it into a suitcase, disposed of it in a lake. These weren't the actions of someone simply terrified and reacting. They showed planning, concealment, and a clear awareness of guilt. In 2003, a Kentucky court convicted Cottrell of second-degree manslaughter, theft, and tampering with physical evidence. He received about 17 years in prison, the maximum allowed for those charges. For almost 2 decades, he was behind bars. When he finally walked out, the calendar had changed, but the question remained. Had prison changed him, or had it just locked his violence away for a while? In 2025, that question was answered. Inside the home of Kayla Blake and her 13-year-old daughter, Kennedy McCorder, police discovered a scene of horror. Both had been stabbed to death. Cottrell had a personal connection to Kayla. This was not a random break-in or a stranger invasion. He had access to her, and on that day, he used it to devastating effect. When officers detained him, he had what appeared to be blood on his clothing. Investigators moved quickly to secure the scene, gather forensic evidence, and reconstruct the timeline. The parallels to 2003 were impossible to ignore. Extreme violence, a personal relationship with the victim, attempts to control the narrative, and the aftermath. But this time, the escalation was undeniable. In 2003, one man was killed. In 2025, a mother and her young daughter. Authorities charged Cottrell with murder and tampering with physical evidence. As the case moved forward, his earlier conviction cast a long shadow. A young offender who killed once, served his time, and then, not long after release, killed again. This time, 2 victims, one of them a child. The story became more than one man's crimes. It became a commentary on recidivism, the risk of violent offenders reoffending after long sentences. Risk assessment, whether we can ever truly know if someone like Cottrell has changed. And the limits of punishment, whether time served always means threat reduced. As of now, Joshua Cottrell awaits trial for the murders of Kayla Blake and 13-year-old Kennedy McCorder. For their loved ones, the legal arguments around his past and present mean little next to the reality of their loss. 2 people gone, a child never to grow up, and a man who had already shown, once before, exactly how far his violence could go.
Case 5, Brandon P. Milan, Florida, USA. Our 5th case is one of the most brutal domestic killings in recent Florida history. It happened inside a car. In the quiet city of DeLand, Florida, a brand new Volkswagen Jetta sat parked. Inside, Amy Humphrey was trapped with a man she knew, Brandon P. Milan. What followed was a sustained, frenzied attack. Armed with a box cutter, Milan stabbed Amy 77 times. 77. Each wound a mark of rage, obsession, and chilling focus. Before that day, Milan's record already showed trouble. He had drug offenses, weapons charges, and a history of run-ins with law enforcement. People who knew him described him as volatile and controlling, especially in relationships. In April 2021, a dispute over a firearm escalated. What could have remained a tense, dangerous argument became something far worse. Milan's anger focused on the one person closest to him, Amy. He got her into the Jetta, and in that confined space, everything exploded. The attack was not one or two frantic blows. It was systematic, repeated, lethal. After killing Amy, Milan wasn't finished. He took her car, took her phone, tried to erase his presence and escape. As he fled, he made another choice that would add even more weight to his eventual sentence. He turned his gun on law enforcement. When detectives moved to arrest him, Milan fired on them. Officers fired back. A tense armed confrontation unfolded, one that easily could have left more people dead. Eventually, he was taken into custody. Investigators built their case with DNA evidence on the box cutter, blood spatter and forensic analysis inside the car, and surveillance footage and digital records showing his movements. The picture was clear. A man with a violent history, a domestic dispute that escalated into lethal obsession, and an attempted escape that turned into a shootout with police. During the trial, Milan made a surprising choice. He decided to represent himself. It drew attention. Commentators questioned the decision, but in the end, it didn't change the facts. The evidence spoke louder than any argument he could make. He was convicted of first-degree murder for killing Amy Humphrey. For firing on detectives, he received an additional life sentence. For the court, made one thing sure. Brandon P. Milan would never again be free. He was sentenced to life in Florida State Prison without the possibility of parole. For Amy's family, the number of years doesn't erase the number that matters most. 77 stab wounds, a car that became a crime scene, a relationship that turned deadly. A case that shows how quickly intimate violence can escalate when someone with a history of weapons and aggression decides that control matters more than life itself.
5 men, 5 different backgrounds, different cities, different victims, but one common pattern: escalation. Liam James Reed, whose violence was visible long before he finally murdered Emma Agnew. William Arnold Armorandez III, who turned gang loyalty into a 5-year killing spree. Avante Armstead, who pushed a trusting friend off a cliff and left him to die. Joshua Cottrell, who killed, served his time, and then killed again. And Brandon Milan, whose rage inside a car ended one woman's life in 77 separate blows. In each case, there were warning signs, prior convictions, patterns of aggression, moments where someone might have asked, how far is this going to go? Sometimes the system caught up in time. Sometimes it didn't. What these stories make clear is that violent behavior rarely appears out of nowhere. It grows, it escalates, and if no one can stop it, it eventually finds a victim who doesn't walk away. If you found this video informative, consider subscribing for more in-depth true crime stories. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the past someone carries with them can be the clearest warning about what they might do next.